You think you're in control of your bank account, but you're actually running a program installed by your parents before you were 10 years old. Most people don't have a money problem. They have a biological ceiling they're not allowed to cross. And until you see it, you're destined to return to the same number forever. Two kids, same street, same school, same lack of resources. 20 years later, one is building wealth, while the other is working twice as hard just to stay in the same place. We call it luck. We call it the system. But the truth is much more uncomfortable. One of them broke a pattern they didn't even know they had, while the other is still fighting a ghost. Every family has a secret number. It's the point where things consistently stop. It's that surgical precision where the car breaks down or an emergency happens the exact moment your savings start to grow. That's not bad luck. That's your nervous system protecting you from a level of success it wasn't calibrated for. In the next few minutes, we're going to stop looking at the economy and start looking at the internal mechanics of the poverty loop. I'm going to show you how it was built, why your brain self-medicates with bad financial decisions, and the exact psychological shift required to finally exit. The story most people carry about poverty and financial struggle is fundamentally external. The economy is unfair. The system is rigged against certain people and designed to protect others. Opportunity is unevenly distributed, and it is. Wages have not kept pace with costs, and they haven't. The gap between those who inherit wealth and those who start from nothing is real, documented, and growing. All of this is true. None of it is the complete explanation. The common belief goes something like this: if you work hard enough, if you make the right decisions, if you get the right break at the right time, you can move from where you are to somewhere better. Financial struggle is a temporary condition caused by external forces, and the solution is external as well. More income, better opportunities, a different job, a different city, a different set of circumstances. This belief is deeply human. It is also, for many people, quietly devastating. Because when you believe that your financial situation is primarily external, you spend your energy trying to change external things. You work more hours, you find a second job, you wait for the opportunity that hasn't arrived yet. You make incremental improvements to your circumstances, while the underlying pattern, the one that created those circumstances, remains completely untouched.
And the pattern is patient. It doesn't need you to fail dramatically. It just needs you to stay oriented toward the outside while it operates quietly and consistently on the inside. You can change jobs, cities, partners, income levels, and still return to the same number. Because the number was never in the circumstances. It was in you. There is a version of this belief that is even more subtle and even more costly. It is the belief that financial struggle is a personality trait, that some people are simply not built for financial success, that the capacity to build wealth is distributed unevenly at birth, that some people have it and others don't, and that belonging to one category or the other is simply a fact of life to be accepted. This version is not usually spoken aloud. It lives beneath the spoken beliefs, in the decisions people make without examining them, in the opportunities they don't pursue because something tells them it isn't for people like them, in the number they unconsciously target, not the number they say they want, but the number they consistently return to regardless of what happens in between. The limit is real, but it is not made of circumstance. It is made of something that was handed to you long before you had any say in what you would receive. Here is what the research actually shows about financial stress and decision-making, and it is more disturbing than most people are prepared to consider. A study conducted at Harvard by behavioral economist Sendhil Mullainathan found that when a person's mind is consumed by financial pressure, not theoretical worry, but the active, present-tense stress of not knowing how to cover an immediate expense, their effective cognitive function drops by the equivalent of 13 IQ points. 13 points. That is the same cognitive impairment produced by going 24 hours without sleep. This means that the people who most need to make clear, strategic, long-term financial decisions are operating with the most compromised cognitive capacity to make them. The system does not simply make wealth harder to build for people under financial stress. It makes clear thinking itself harder. And unclear thinking produces decisions that extend and deepen the stress, which further compromises thinking, which produces worse decisions. This is the loop, not a metaphor, a documented, self-reinforcing mechanical cycle, and it runs quietly inside every financial decision a person makes until something makes it visible. But here is the layer that most analyses miss. Think about a person who grew up watching their parents argue about money. Not occasionally, consistently. The specific low-grade tension that enters a household when there is never quite enough. The way conversations stop when a bill arrives. The way certain topics become unspeakable. The way one parent works more and the other goes quiet, and neither of them ever explains to the child what is actually happening, because they themselves don't fully understand it. That child is not learning about money. They're learning what money does to people. They're learning that money is a source of conflict, of shame, of powerlessness. They're learning that wanting more than you have is dangerous, because every time the adults around them wanted more, something went wrong. They're learning at the neurological level that a certain financial reality is home, and the human nervous system is designed to return to home. Imagine someone who spends their 20s working hard, making progress, watching their income grow steadily. Every time their monthly earnings approach a certain number, not a random number, but the number that feels like the boundary of what someone from their family is allowed to earn, something happens. An unexpected expense, a decision that doesn't work out, a relationship that creates a financial drain at precisely the wrong moment. From the outside, it looks like bad luck. From the inside, it feels like the world resisting. But the number is always the same. And the number is not a coincidence. The number was not set by the economy. It was set by years of observation during the years when the brain is most plastic and most receptive, childhood. The system didn't build this. Your home did. Most people never realize this. They spend years trying to outrun the pattern with new strategies, new income sources, new financial plans, while the pattern itself, installed at a level far deeper than strategy, remains perfectly intact. There's a financial concept that captures the external mechanics of this trap with unusual precision. It is sometimes called the Boots theory of poverty, the observation that it is structurally, mathematically more expensive to be poor than to be wealthy. A person with limited capital buys cheaper goods that deteriorate faster, pays higher interest rates because they represent greater risk to lenders, cannot purchase in bulk to reduce unit cost, and absorbs late fees and overdraft penalties at a rate that someone with a financial buffer never encounters. Over a 10-year period, the person with less money consistently spends more money to maintain the same quality of life. The system charges a premium for poverty. It is not a moral judgment, it is arithmetic. But this external trap, as real as it is, still does not fully explain the persistence of the loop. Because people escape extreme poverty through income increases alone more often than they escape the psychological limit that keeps returning them to the same financial position, regardless of what their income does in the interim. The external trap explains why it is hard to start. The internal pattern explains why progress keeps reversing. There's another dimension to this pattern that the financial self-help industry almost never addresses. The loop doesn't just shape how people earn, it shapes how they spend. And the spending pattern is not irrational, it is psychologically precise. When you are under chronic financial stress, your brain is in a state of threat. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, is elevated. The nervous system is running in survival mode. In survival mode has one primary directive: find relief now. Not next month, not in 5 years when the investment compounds, now. This is why people under financial stress spend money on items that appear, from the outside, to be luxury decisions. The new phone, the branded clothing, the dinner out that the budget cannot accommodate. These are not failures of discipline, they're the brain's attempt to self-medicate, to produce a brief, reliable hit of dopamine in an environment that offers very little of it. The relief is real. It lasts approximately 20 minutes. The financial consequence lasts considerably longer. And this pattern too was learned, not from a textbook, from watching the adults in the room do exactly the same thing, spend just beyond their means in moments of stress, because that is what people in this family do when things get hard. There's a concept that explains the persistence of the poverty loop more precisely than almost anything else in behavioral psychology, and it has nothing to do with income or opportunity. It is the concept of financial identity. Not what you earn, not what you own, but who you believe you are in relation to money, at a level so fundamental that it operates beneath your conscious awareness and shapes your decisions before you have the chance to examine them. Research from the field of identity-based behavior at Stanford has consistently shown that people do not make financial decisions based primarily on rational calculation. They make financial decisions based on what feels consistent with who they are. And who they are, at that deep pre-conscious level, was substantially formed before the age of 10, in the financial environment of the family they were born into.
This explains something that purely economic analyses of poverty cannot. Why people who receive sudden, significant financial windfalls, lottery winners being the most studied example, return to their previous financial position within 3 to 5 years at a rate that defies probability. They did not lose the money through bad decisions in any simple sense. Their identity rejected the new position the way a body rejects a transplanted organ. The new financial reality did not match who they knew themselves to be. And so, through hundreds of small decisions, none of which felt dramatic, all of which felt natural, they returned to home. Pay close attention to what happens next. This is not a story about willpower or discipline. It is a story about identity operating below the level where willpower and discipline function. You cannot discipline your way out of a loop that is running beneath the level of conscious decision-making. You cannot out-strategize a pattern that rewrites your strategies from the inside. What you can do, what the people who genuinely exit the loop consistently do, is make the pattern visible. And once it is visible, you can begin the much slower, much more uncomfortable process of separating it from your identity. Think about what it means to grow up in a household where money is perpetually scarce. You do not simply learn that money is scarce. You learn that people like us, people from this family, this neighborhood, this background, exist in a specific relationship with money. You learn the language your family uses about wealth and about wealthy people. You learn whether ambition is celebrated or viewed with suspicion. You learn the limit not as a number, but as a felt sense of what is appropriate, what is safe, what is home. Your life is not stuck, your identity is. And then you carry that felt sense into every financial decision you make for the rest of your life unless something interrupts the pattern at a level deep enough to actually reach it. Here is where the parent dimension becomes impossible to ignore. Your parents did not choose to give you a financial limit. In almost every case, they were operating inside their own loop, a loop they inherited from their parents who inherited it from theirs. The pattern did not begin with them. They were transmitters, not originators. But that does not make the transmission less real or less consequential. Imagine a child who grows up watching a parent who is genuinely talented, genuinely hardworking, and consistently unable to hold on to money. Every time income increases, something happens. An obligation appears, a family member needs help, a decision is made that pulls the number back to where it has always been. The child does not analyze this. The child absorbs it. And what they absorb is not a lesson about financial management. It is a template for what financial life looks like, for what it feels like, for what it is allowed to become. 20 years later, that child, now an adult with their own income and their own decisions, finds themselves at the same number, confused, working hard, unable to understand why progress won't hold past a certain point. The answer is not in their spreadsheet. It is in their nervous system, and it got there through the most powerful teaching mechanism that exists, years of close observation of the people they loved most. This is the part that most people get completely wrong. They look at the pattern and they try to break it with effort, with new strategies, with better financial decisions, and sometimes this produces temporary progress, but without addressing the identity structure underneath, the deep, inherited sense of what a person like them is allowed to have, the pattern reasserts itself with remarkable consistency. The loop was not built by your failures. It was built long before you had the chance to succeed or fail at anything. The loop does not operate only inside a person, it operates between people. This is the dimension that makes it most difficult to escape, and the one that the people who do escape almost universally describe as the most unexpected challenge they faced.
Human beings are neurologically designed for social calibration. Mirror neurons, specialized brain cells that activate both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing it, mean that we are continuously, automatically, unconsciously absorbing the behavioral patterns of the people closest to us. We do not choose to do this. It happens at a level beneath conscious awareness, and it happens most powerfully and most permanently during childhood, when the brain is at the most plastic.
This means that the financial behaviors of the adults in your childhood home were not simply observed, they were rehearsed neurologically thousands of times before you ever made a single independent financial decision. The way your parents talked about money, related to money, avoided money, feared money, spent money, lost money, all of it was being written into your nervous system as the default template for what financial life looks like. Once you understand this, many things start to make sense. The pattern is not simply inherited at the individual level, it is reinforced at the social level by the community that surrounds the family. There's a gravitational force that operates within any tight social group, a collective sense of what is normal, what is acceptable for people from this place, this background, this community. And that gravitational force is not passive, it is active, it pulls. When someone begins to move outside the financial reality of their community, when they start earning more, building more, thinking differently about money and risk and possibility, they encounter resistance that has nothing to do with economics. The people around them become uncomfortable, not maliciously, not intentionally, but with a consistency that is impossible to ignore once you see it. The person who is succeeding becomes a mirror that reflects back to the group what they have not done. And that reflection is painful, so the group applies pressure, subtle, constant, and deeply personal, to bring the person back to a level that feels familiar, back to home. This is not cynicism about human nature. It is a description of how social systems maintain their equilibrium. Every stable social group has a center of gravity, and individuals who move away from that center experience a pullback toward it that is social, emotional, and relational, not just financial. The people who exit the loop almost always describe a specific moment or a series of moments where they had to make a decision that felt like a betrayal, not of their values, of their group, of the implicit agreement that people from this place stay at this level, that success of a certain kind is not something we do, that wanting more than what we have is a kind of disloyalty. That decision, that moment of choosing the trajectory over the group's approval, is one of the most psychologically demanding things a person can do. Because the group is not just external. After years of absorption and mirror neuron rehearsal, the group is inside. Its voice sounds like your own voice. Its limit feels like your limit. Its definition of what is appropriate feels like your own judgment about what you deserve. There is a specific pattern worth examining here. One that appears consistently in the psychology of people who remain inside the loop despite genuine effort to exit it. It is the pattern of the fixed number. Think about someone in a sales role who consistently reaches a specific monthly income, $13,000, let us say. And then with remarkable regularity, something happens. A client cancels. An unexpected personal expense arrives. An equipment failure. A family obligation. The number resets. And the following month, the climb begins again toward the same threshold, which is again meant by the same category of disruption at the same point. From the outside, this looks like bad luck. From the inside, it feels like resistance from the world itself. But when you examine the psychology carefully, what you find is not bad luck and not cosmic resistance. You find a nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do, maintaining the financial reality it learned in childhood is home. The disruptions are real, but their timing is not random. They arrive when the person is approaching the boundary of what they have internalized as their limit. The number is not on the bank statement. It is in the nervous system, and it was written there long before the person ever opened an account. And this is where the parental dimension becomes most complex and most important. Separating from the financial pattern of your parents is not the same as separating from your parents. It is not a rejection of them or of what they built or of the sacrifices they made, but it requires a kind of internal clarity that is uncomfortable to develop. The clarity to see the pattern they transmitted without collapsing into blame and without the other error, which is denying that the pattern exists at all out of loyalty. Your parents were not the origin of the loop. They were inside it too. They transmitted what they received: beliefs, behaviors, a felt sense of what was possible and what wasn't, a financial identity that was formed by their own childhood observations of their own parents. The loop is older than any of you. It has been running in your family for generations, and it will continue running in your children and in their children unless someone in the chain sees it clearly enough to stop transmitting it. That someone can be you, but only if you are willing to see the pattern for what it is, not a personal failure, not a character flaw, not evidence of anything wrong with you or your family. A program, running on hardware that was built for a different environment. And programs, unlike personalities, can be rewritten.
There are 3 specific shifts in perception that consistently appear in the psychology of people who genuinely exit the poverty loop. Not motivational commitments, not financial strategies, perceptual shifts, changes in how a person sees their situation before they change anything about it. Here is what people who escape actually do differently, not harder, differently. The first shift is the separation of condition from identity. There is a difference, a significant, consequential difference, between being in a difficult financial situation and being a person who belongs in a difficult financial situation. The first is a condition. It is external, temporary, and changeable. The second is an identity. It is internal, self-reinforcing, and resistant to change in exactly the proportion that a person believes it to be true about themselves. Most people living inside the poverty loop experience their financial reality as identity rather than condition, not consciously, but in the felt sense that certain opportunities are not for them, that certain levels of income would feel foreign and uncomfortable, that the distance between where they are and where they want to be is not just practical, but somehow categorical, like a different species of person lives on the other side of that gap. This feeling is the loop speaking, and the loop learned to speak in your voice a long time ago. The shift is not to simply declare a new identity. That is not how deep psychological patterns change. The shift is to begin examining your financial behaviors and decisions with a specific question. Is this decision coming from clear analysis, or is it coming from a felt sense of what people like me do? The question itself creates a gap between the pattern and the person, and that gap, however small, is where genuine change becomes possible. The second shift is understanding where real financial leverage begins. The instinct for most people inside the loop is to try to fix the financial situation directly. More income, better investments, smarter spending. These are not wrong, but they are frequently attempted without the foundation that makes them sustainable. The research is unambiguous on this point. Under chronic financial stress, the cognitive bandwidth required for long-term financial planning is the first resource to be depleted. Before any investment strategy, before any wealth-building framework, before any attempt to engage with money differently, the first objective is to reduce the cognitive cost of financial anxiety. This means building a buffer, not a retirement account, not an investment portfolio, a buffer. A small protected reserve of money whose only function is to convert financial emergencies into crises, into inconveniences. The research suggests that even a relatively modest buffer, enough to cover one unexpected expense without derailing the month, produces measurable improvements in decision-making quality across every other domain. This is not exciting advice. It does not feel like wealth building. But it is the step that most people skip in their rush to get to the more interesting parts, and its absence is precisely why the more interesting parts consistently fail to produce lasting results. You cannot compound wealth from inside a cognitive state of emergency. The first investment is not in an asset, it is in your own ability to think. That is not a metaphor, it is the sequence, and skipping it is why most financial plans fail before they begin. The third shift is the most difficult and the most important. It is the shift from unconscious transmission to conscious examination of what you are carrying. Every person reading this is transmitting a financial identity to someone, to children if they have them,
to younger siblings, to people in their orbit who are observing them the way they once observed their parents. The question is not whether you are transmitting, the question is what you are transmitting, and whether you have examined it closely enough to know. This does not require blame. It does not require a forensic accounting of everything your parents did or didn't do. It requires something quieter and more demanding, the willingness to look at your own relationship with money, your ceiling, your patterns, your felt sense of what you deserve, and ask honestly where it came from. Not to assign responsibility, to locate the origin of the program so that you can decide, consciously, whether you want to keep running it. And this is where things become interesting. Because the moment you can see the pattern clearly, not as a personal flaw, not as evidence of your inadequacy, but as an inherited behavioral template that was installed before you had any choice in the matter, the loop loses a significant portion of its power. Not all of it. The nervous system takes time to rewire. The social gravity is real and must be navigated carefully. The identity shift is slow and non-linear. But the loop cannot survive being seen, not completely, not permanently. It depends above all else on remaining invisible. At some point in this process, in the process of seeing the loop, tracing its origins, examining the patterns that were handed to you, a specific kind of discomfort tends to arrive. It is not guilt, exactly. It is something more complex, a mixture of clarity and grief. The clarity of finally understanding something that has always operated beneath the surface. The grief of recognizing that a significant amount of time and effort was spent trying to solve a problem at the level of strategy, when the actual problem was running at a much deeper level. And somewhere underneath that, for many people, a quieter and more complicated feeling about the people who built the loop they inherited. Let this be said as precisely as possible. Your parents did not fail you by transmitting the patterns they transmitted. They transmitted what they received. They operated at the edge of what their own formation allowed. In almost every case, they worked within the limits of a financial identity they never chose and never examined, not because they lacked intelligence or love or the desire to give their children a better start, but because the loop does not announce itself. It runs silently. It presents itself as reality rather than as pattern. And people who have never seen it described from the outside have no particular reason to question whether what they are experiencing is fixed or simply inherited. This matters, not as an excuse for behaviors that caused real harm, but as a correction to the story that the loop itself tends to produce, the story that someone is to blame, that you were given less than you deserved, that the gap between where you are and where you could be is someone's fault. Blame is itself a feature of the loop. It orients you toward the past, toward the external, toward the actions of other people, precisely away from the only place where the loop can actually be broken, which is inside your own psychology, in the present, in the decisions you are making right now. Think about the number where things consistently stop in your own financial life, the level that keeps reasserting itself regardless of what you do between now and then. Ask yourself, and take a moment before answering, whose voice does it sound like? Whose definition of what is possible that you absorb when you were too young to question it? Whose relationship with money became your first template? You don't need to answer that question out loud. You simply need to see that the number has a history, that it did not arrive with you, that it was built before you got here.
There is a distinction worth carrying from this point forward. There is a difference between a pattern you inherited and a pattern you own. When you inherited it, you had no choice. But the moment you see it, the moment it becomes visible as a pattern rather than invisible as reality, it shifts categories. It moves from inherited to owned. And owned patterns can be examined, questioned, and over time deliberately replaced. This is not fast work. The nervous system does not rewire itself because you had an insight. But the insight is where the work begins. And without it, the work cannot begin at all. The loop was built. Anything that was built can be rebuilt differently. Return to the two people at the beginning. Same neighborhood, same school, same starting conditions. 20 years later, one is out, one is still inside. The explanation that feels most natural, the one the culture offers most readily, is luck, timing, who they knew, which opportunities appeared for one and not the other. These explanations are not entirely wrong, but they are profoundly incomplete. And their incompleteness has a cost.
Because as long as the gap between those two people is understood as a product of external forces, the actual mechanism that produced it remains invisible, and invisible mechanisms continue operating indefinitely. The person who got out did not simply work harder. In many cases, they didn't work harder at all. What they did, through some combination of circumstance, exposure, conversation, or a single idea that arrived at the right moment, was see the loop. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough. Enough to recognize that the weight pressing down on them was not made of reality, that it was made of pattern, that it had a history, that it was, in the most fundamental sense, not theirs. That recognition does not immediately change a financial situation. The nervous system rewires slowly. The social gravity is real and persistent. The identity shift takes years, not months. There are no dramatic moments of transformation, only a long sequence of small decisions made slightly differently because the person making them is no longer entirely convinced that the loop is all there is. But here is what changes immediately. The orientation changes. The person stops trying to fix the outside of a problem that lives on the inside. They stop, in a specific and important sense, fighting the wrong thing.
Most people will spend their entire lives trying to change their financial situation without ever examining the financial identity underneath it. They will earn more and return to the same number. They will save more and find reasons to spend it. They will read the right books and follow the right advice and feel, persistently, like something is working against them because something is. It is just not what they think it is. The loop is not your enemy. It was never designed to harm you. It was designed, by the logic of the nervous system, to keep you in familiar territory, to protect you from the discomfort of the unknown by returning you, reliably, to what feels like home. The problem is that home was built inside a constraint that no longer serves you, and the people who built it did the best they could with what they had been given, which was, in most cases, a loop of their own. You are not obligated to keep living inside something that was built before you arrived. The ceiling was never yours. It was only ever borrowed.